Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants joining us for this workshop, which is the virtual launch of Technology and Ceasefires, a publication by UNIDIR on exploring the use of technology for remote ceasefire monitoring and verification. My name is Simon Yaski. I will be facilitating today's virtual publication launch. Technology permitting, we have had a few problems during the test of this, so I hope it will work. If not, my colleague Hardy will be stepping in. Thank you in advance to Hardy for that. I'm a senior non-resident fellow at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, and I'm also senior advisor on security arrangements with the United Nations Integrated Transitional Assistance Mission in Sudan. And I'm very glad to be here and to be joined today by representatives from UN entities, including field presences, states, regional organizations, civil society, and the private sector. We have over 200 registrations. I'm not too sure, can't see on my screen how many people have actually turned up today, but welcome to all of you. As I said, this is the virtual launch of UNIDIR's Technology and Ceasefire publication. It is titled Exploring the Use of Technology for Remote Ceasefire Monitoring and Verification. And for those of you who are less familiar with us, UNIDIR is an independent and autonomous institute within the UN. We focus on disarmament and international security related issues. And our goal is to assist the international community to develop the practical and innovative ideas that are needed to find solutions to critical security problems. The event will open with some scene-setting remarks regarding the past use of technology in a ceasefire context by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. We'll then present the results of our research, and this is research that has explored what technologies are available to help monitor and verify ceasefires. The publication also provides a series of guiding considerations to reflect upon before using technology to aid with ceasefire monitoring and verification, and we'll outline several of them during the session today. This will be followed by a panel discussion with 4 excellent experts and friends, and I look forward to welcoming them on camera shortly, during which we will discuss the various angles of the use of technology in ceasefire contexts. Now, before we welcome the first participants, or the first people intervening, if you would like, a few housekeeping and administrative announcements. We are lucky to be able to connect virtually across the world. As I said, I hope my connection will last. Technology isn't perfect, however. We have put in place measures to deal with disruptions that are within our means. This is a secure platform. All of you will have received joining instructions that include a personalized link. However, should the session be compromised, we'll close it down and launch a new meeting on Zoom. And a new access for this will be emailed to you very shortly after the closing down, and we should be able to be back online within 5 to 10 minutes. This is a backup measure, one that unfortunately we have to take out of precautions, if you would like, but I'm confident and hopeful that we will not have to use it. Those of you joining as attendees will have your cameras off and your mics muted by design. This is because, as I mentioned, there are over 200 people that we expect to attend today, and it will simply make managing the seminar and managing the bandwidth a lot easier. You are, however, strongly encouraged to post your questions through the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, next to the chat function, to the left of the chat function, that is. And as time permits, I'll relay these questions to the floor, or to especially if you would like to go to any specific panelists. We'll try and answer as many questions as possible, but should any go unanswered because of time constraints, colleagues in UNIDIR will follow up with the panelists and provide you with a response after the event. The meeting will be recorded, and it will be made available on UNIDIR's website following the event. So I hope that is acceptable to all. And with this, I'd like to thank you for joining us and give the floor to Dr. Giacomo Percipaolo, who is Program Head of UNIDIR's Security and Technology Program. And this report was a joint effort between the SecTech program and the Conventional Arms Program in UNIDIR. Welcome, Giacomo. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Simon, for the introduction. It's great to see you again. Thanks for the introduction. I'm really not going to speak very long because I'd like to save as much time as possible for the actual expert panelists that we have today to discuss the substance of this very interesting topic. But allow me to open or to follow your lead in opening this event. First and foremost, by thanking everyone who took the time to join us today, with particular thanks to all of our panelists that accepted our invitation to come and share their knowledge and expertise with us. I'm Giacomo Persipaoli. I have the privilege of leading the UNIDIR's Security and Technology Program. And it is truly my pleasure to welcome all of you, including those that have just joined. I could see the number of attendees going up, Simon, as you were delivering the first round of introductions to this virtual launch of our new report on technology and ceasefire monitoring. This is very important because this is the first publication that was produced by design as a result of a joint project between two programs at UNIDIR, the Security and Technology Program and the Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program. And like any other research that is conducted at UNIDIR, this work was only possible thanks to the generous contributions of our donors. So allow me to express our sincere gratitude to the governments that have supported this joint research project, including Germany, that is a sponsor for both SecTech and CAP, as well as the Netherlands, Switzerland, and not a government, but still an important donor for the SecTech program, Microsoft. So why have we decided to pursue this joint collaborative research project across programs at UNIDIR, particularly between the Security and Technology and the Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program? Because technology has always played a key role within armed conflict and violence more generally, and it has affected international security in a variety of ways. Particularly if we focus on conventional arms, clearly, whether you're looking at the manufacturing process or transfer or weapons and ammunition management and use, technology comes in at very different stages in many different ways. However, a range of advanced technologies and less advanced technologies are really becoming increasingly accessible. So while technology has always been there, what we've seen in recent years is really lowering of the general barriers to access to these kind of technologies, which is becoming increasingly accessible and available to states, private sector, NGOs, civilians, and other non-state actors, including armed groups. However, it should be important to note that often the link between technology and security is more often than not explored through the lenses of risk. And what are the risks that new technologies are bringing? What are some of the most negative and disruptive effect that technology can bring to the context of international peace and security? However, it is also important that we focus on some of the benefits, some of the opportunities that advances in technologies can also bring to the table. Therefore, the main kind of objective of this joint project between our two programs was really to investigate how technology interacts with issues around conventional arms and more general the conflict space, but really looking at the benefit that it brings. In the context of ceasefire monitoring in particular, this joint project aimed or enabled us to investigate some areas that remain quite underexplored, at least to date, which ties in with other strands of work that is conducted by our respective program, whether it is the kind of arms-related risk analysis toolkit that is being produced by CAP, or some of the work that we do in the Security and Technology Program in relation to the cyber domain and the digital ecosystem that is also becoming increasingly relevant in the context of conflict. Really, the joint nature of this research project was also instrumental in demonstrating how, while everyone is preaching how important it is to break the silos and work across thematic areas, etc., in the way that we really deal day to day with some of this very important work, it remains to be quite siloed in nature. However, it is important to bring the technological community and the conflict prevention, peacekeeping, and disarmament communities together and put together knowledge in order to respond to the new challenges and expand our ways of working. This is always with a view to making sure that we make the most out of the technologies that we have available and really have like a tech positive approach towards technological advancements and innovation rather than a risk mitigation approach, which is important, is relevant, but it should not be the only way through which, or the only layer of analysis that we bring to this very important discussion. With that, I just wish all of you a great event. I hope you enjoy the discussion that will follow. If you haven't done so already, I hope you have the time to read and enjoy the publication. And Simon, over to you. Thanks again.
Giacomo, thank you very much. I hope we'll have a tech positive approach at the end of this session as well. The tech gods will be with us. But thank you for those opening remarks, Giacomo. It's always a pleasure to see you. And I'd now like to introduce Mr. Alexander Hugh, who is head of mission with the International Commission on Missing Persons in Iraq, but also a former deputy chief monitor of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Alexander is here in his private capacity with us today and will be providing a scene-setting presentation regarding the use of technology during the OSCE's Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. This was one of the missions I looked at when I was working with the United Nations on ceasefires, and it was one that I think was of particular interest as it did seem to be stretching the boundaries on the use of technology in ceasefires. So I'm particularly pleased that we are able to learn from this experience today, and I know it is one that has been drawn upon for the reports that we are launching today. But Alexander, over to you and welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Simon, and welcome all. First of all, I would like to thank UNIDIR for inviting me to address the eminent panel and, of course, the audience that is here with everyone today. And I would also like to congratulate UNIDIR, Security and Technology and Conventional Arms Ammunition Programs for their joint publication. Now, I would like to make at the beginning a few general points that are valid for the use of technology in monitoring and verification. And they may also, of course, be relevant for human verification and monitoring. And these are areas where probably your discussion later might be focusing on. First, that kind of operation requires objective, precise, and often timely information. Second, it requires a degree of trust by the parties in this specific monitoring and verification operation, with or without technology. The operation as such requires access in order to get and collect that information. And fourth, there needs to be a mechanism in place to translate and interpret the facts collected by this operation. Now, technology as such, in the context of ceasefires, can be used for various different aspects of a ceasefire. I just want to briefly mention them as I feel they are important here at the outset too. That is, of course, first, the ceasefire per se in a broad definition, be it the politically agreed ceasefire at the end of a long negotiation, but it could also include a temporary ceasing of hostilities prior to an actual ceasefire, where technology may also play a role. And of course, second, in order to make a ceasefire workable, sustainable, and irreversible at some point, there are measures in place for which verification and monitoring through technology may also be of interest. That includes, for instance, the disengagement of forces and hardware away from each other, the withdrawal of specific types of weapon defined by caliber or otherwise, the cantonment of weapons and troops that would need to be verified, disarmament and live fire training exercise provisions in an agreement, and other measures that depend on safe environment, including humanitarian operations. At this point, I also would like quickly to make the important distinguishing definition between using technology for monitoring, because their technology can assist to collect accurate observation of the reality on the ground, and second, verification, where technology may assist to establish empirically whether a ceasefire measure has been implemented as agreed. Now, a few points on the different areas I've mentioned at the outset. First, on objective, precise, and timely information collection. Under this point first, I would like to mention the coverage of a certain area that a monitoring operation may be tasked to operate on. Think of demarcation lines, front lines, and also areas behind those lines or in between those lines. They can be very large, they can be extensive. That means that human monitors and verifiers might actually not be able to quickly or at all cover an entire large area or long lines. That means also that already at this stage, we will see that likely a combination of human monitors and verifiers together with a combination of different sensors on the technology side might actually be the best solution in the end. In any case, and you will hear that throughout my introductory remark, the technology can only be seen as a measure to complement human work in monitoring and verification. The second point on this subject is the question of accuracy and precision. Human monitoring always depends on the human that is executing the work. Technology clearly can help to increase precision, increase accuracy, not least through automated recognition software, for instance, that may be able to detect certain types of equipment, certain types of movements much better than a human eye can. And third, of course, is the speed of deployment that I have mentioned in the beginning, that technology might help to, because it can be deployed depending on what technology one is looking at rather quickly. Think of a satellite that is already in place or a UAV that is piloted from a distance. The second point that I mentioned was access to the fighting theater or the former fighting theater. Unhindered access is important for human monitors as it is for technology. That also applies not only in relation to security, but also in relation to day and nighttime work, where as in nighttime, often human work is more difficult, arguably more risk prone than work at day. And also in that area or in that field and basket, I would also put the name of the ability for technology to collect and triangulate, that is verify information. There are, of course, restrictions imposed where technology can help to overcome. These restrictions are either active, aimed at human patrols, where patrols have been stopped, they can't go forward either to their own internal regulatory framework, or then because there are passive restrictions such as mines and unexploded ordnance that are there that prevent foot patrols in particular or vehicle patrols to continue. Their technology may help to overcome these obstacles, but technology itself is also prone to interference and obstacles. Think of electronic warfare. Then the next point is that of the importance of having a mechanism to translate, interpret the facts collected by technology. Here I have 4 sub-points to make. One is on data management. Very important to recognize that deploying technology to the front, to a line or to an area that needs to be monitored requires a substantive rear administrative backbone. The military would talk about the tooth to tail ratio. Maybe in technology, one can develop the ratio named as sensor to server. That would need to be looked at very clearly, because the maintenance, the data processing itself, the analytical part of the information mass that is generated is significantly. Also, it is important that technology helps to make information fit for purpose, for whom that information is intended to. Is it member states, participating states, the parties to the conflict, the public, a ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism? Here also maybe artificial intelligence can play a role in future, and in my own experience we have seen, at least in the beginnings where technology had been used there, automated detection system may indeed be helpful to interpret information properly. But once again, and the third point here, humans will always be needed to make sense of it all at the end, and most importantly, humans will be needed to communicate this information, not just in dry reports or interesting maps and photographs, but they will be needed to communicate and transmit this information to the parties of the conflict. Here again, you see technology as a complementary tool. Within that basket, last, I would also add the question or the area, very important as well, of the technology helping to attribute violations to one or the other party. Technology is able to do that to a certain degree, but I will come to that soon. There would need to be a system in place that would allow to pass through the information so that information finds an echo chamber through which attributions can get back to work, in essence, to prevent further violations from happening. Trust by the parties in that system is equally important. The collection of biotechnology can help to create objective, non-biased information. That, of course, always depends on how this is explained as to how and who is collecting this information. Information sharing is an area where technology can help, including should there be a ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism in place. Information storing, third, is an important point. Data security, one aspect to mention in terms of trust by the parties in that system. And a bit of an excursus at this point also. Technology may even help to be a confidence building measure. Think of the sides not being able to see what the other side does in a humanitarian undertaking. Technology might be made accessible to both, so both understand what is happening on each other's sides and humanitarian action can take place. Now, to come to an end here, a few preconditions that I think would also need to be discussed and should be in place when thinking of using technology. That is the quality of the agreement in which technology is referred to, or the reference to. Vagueness and leaving too much of interpretation is not helpful to the process. The do's and don'ts for traditional ceasefire agreements also apply for technology. And very important also is for anyone using technology is the preparation to use technology, because the lead up time can be quite significant. In summary, and I'm soon ending my opening remarks here, 8 points I want to give to the panel and the audience here. Technology can provide more, better, reliable, and faster information. It helps to be a reliable monitoring tool, but is also helpful in verifying in different degrees. Technology can assist to overcome shortcomings of human operations in terms of geography, but also security. It can help to improve the security of human monitors and verifiers and reduce costs. Technology can be used to support confidence building measures, including in the humanitarian sphere. But technology is not a silver bullet. More information is not always better information. Technology cannot replace human monitors and verifiers. It is a tool to complement human action. Human interaction with the parties and those directly affected by war and conflict remains indispensable. And finally, technology cannot patch up a bad ceasefire agreement or the lack of political will. Thank you.
Alexander, thank you very much for those opening remarks and for setting the scene so nicely. And I think some very pertinent points here. especially on the fact that, and a point that you've made repeatedly, that, technology can be there to support and enable, but will not replace humans in this. And I think this is something I hope that we're all quite clear on, but I can see that there may be in some places an attempt to over-rely on technology, especially if we are asked to put in place a ceasefire to monitor it, and security or other reasons do not allow us to deploy the humans as we would like. And this is a little bit some of the thinking that drove us to start looking at how we might use technology to better support ceasefire monitoring and verification, was this idea of access. But it is not an all or nothing, if you would like. Both the human and the technology would need to work side by side. So thank you for that. I know that we will come back into some of these issues during our discussion with the panelists. But first, let me turn to the principal author of the report, Sarah, to provide us with a presentation of the findings of the research on technology and ceasefires. Sarah, it's lovely to have you, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined today. It's quite hard to follow Alexander's excellent presentation, but I'll try my best and provide a brief overview explaining the research that was conducted and highlighting the main findings that emerged from the research. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So I will first start with a quick note on terminology. While there is no universally accepted definition of a ceasefire, broadly, the aim is for such agreements to stop or end the violence taking place between the respective conflict parties. And focusing on this study specifically, we focused in particular on ceasefires, which include a monitoring and verification component, where elements to be monitored are defined in the agreement, and there is a process to investigate incidents. And overall, the study's aims were to identify what technologies are available and could help improve or increase remote ceasefire monitoring and verification in order to reduce the risk of harm to personnel on the ground, and to understand how best to use technology in ceasefire contexts. And this study focuses in particular on ceasefires, as these are generally a first step towards a peace agreement. And there has been limited focus to date on the role of technology within this particular space. And indeed, as mentioned by Alexander, ceasefire monitoring and verification is usually conducted by in-person monitors. The role of the human is very important. They play an important role in terms of aiding with dialogue and de-escalation efforts. And however, the presence of in-person monitors isn't always possible or feasible, and technology can be used to help overcome certain challenges or difficulties, such as the inability to travel or to access a location, either because it is deemed too unsafe for monitors or they are prevented from doing so. Sometimes the areas to monitor are very large, and it can be difficult to ensure sufficient in-person presence, particularly when in-person monitors are limited in number. And finally, technology can also help collect many different types of data and synthesize large amounts of data more rapidly than human analysts are able to. So, of course, talking about technologies in such broad terms can be unhelpful to understand exactly what we're referring to and what it means in practice. And it can also create a sense that there are many different technologies that can offer the same type of solution or help. So in this report, we drilled down and broke down essentially a set of 18 different technologies or different types of technologies. And in the context of this research, we defined a technology to include tools, which are both hardware and software, as well as approaches. In other words, ways in which technological means can be utilized. And this broad approach was taken since tools and approaches are closely interlinked, with each feeding into the other. And so we have grouped these 18 technologies into 3 categories: data acquisition, analysis, and communications. And I'll just go through and explain what each of these categories mean and comprise of. So data acquisition technologies capture raw visual, audio, written, or other types of data, which then need further processing and refining through analysis. The data captured by these technologies are most relevant for remote monitoring, but can also play a role in verification activities, such as by presenting proof of an activity or incident. And as such, these technologies can help with both monitoring and verification. Regarding the second category, using technology to collect data means that there's often a lot of information to process and analyze, and this can quickly become an extremely time-consuming task. So analysis technologies can enhance the capabilities of human analysts with a focus on technologies that can process or pre-process data collected by the data acquisition technologies outlined just on the left. And due to space and scope constraints, we included technologies, the underlying technologies. We didn't talk about individual commercial analytical tools, although of course these will be based on kind of AI and data fusion principles. And finally, communications is an essential enabling technology when undertaking ceasefire monitoring and verification. And in the context of this study, communications is defined as aiding with operational information management rather than with public affairs or social media communication. And here again, we focus on the underlying technology. Next slide, please. So each technology is described in depth in the report, where we explain what the technology is and what it can help with. We also describe some of the main technological challenges and limitations that is faced by each technology, as we understand that not everybody necessarily has that knowledge. For the sake of time, I won't go through the 18 technologies, which you can read in your own time in the report, but I will provide one example, that of data scraping, which falls under the data acquisition category. So the description of the technology in this instance explains that data scraping refers to the acquisition of data from news media, such as written press, television, or radio, and social media to help understand the ongoing rhetoric. It helps provide an overview of the various tools that can be used to scrape data, depending on the media being scraped. It also describes examples of how this approach has been used in the past and currently. And this includes, where possible, examples from a ceasefire context, but also more widely drawing from a range of other domains, including peacekeeping and open source information gathering. So in the case of data scraping, examples are given regarding how MINUSMA analyzed radio data to detect hate speech, and how the Innovation Cell within the United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, DPPA, has also been developing an AI-powered advanced media monitoring platform for television and radio content, which automatically transcribes and translates spoken content on these platforms. Under limitations and challenges are included some of the main issues to be aware of when using a specific technology. In the case of data scraping, this includes, for example, but is not limited to, the need to have good linguistic and cultural knowledge in order to be able to make sense of this data, the potential issues around the accuracy of the information in order to avoid using fake or incorrect information, and also recognizing that data scraped in such a way presents only a partial picture of ongoing rhetoric, as information shared through encrypted platforms cannot be retrieved through data scraping. Next slide, please. So to further help the relevant stakeholders understanding how technologies can be applied practically, we have also mapped the data acquisition technologies against 9 activity areas commonly subject to monitoring or verification. This list is not meant to be exhaustive, as each agreement will be and is different given these are shaped by the circumstances of the conflict, but it's a helpful starting point to understand what technology may best suit or apply to gather information relating to a specific activity. Of course, the applicability of a technology is not straightforward, yes, it's applicable, or no, it's not. So here we aim to capture this nuance by reflecting the extent to which a technology could be adapted to helping monitor or verify an activity using a series of tick marks. And really what this demonstrates is that while none of the technologies presented in this report are all well suited to help with all of the 9 identified ceasefire activities, technologies can complement and work together to provide a stronger or more adapted solution. So for example, you can combine the use of acoustic sensors with cameras, or crowdsourcing with satellite imagery and more. And the report goes into more depth and provides examples of such combinations of technologies. Next slide, please. However, It's important to note that our report doesn't only focus on technology, as technology does not occur in a vacuum, and there are multiple other aspects that should be considered beyond the specific technology itself, as was highlighted by Alexander. And this is what we aim to achieve through what we call the guiding considerations. In total, there are 12 considerations regarding the use of technology for remote ceasefire monitoring and verification. These should be taken into account alongside, of course, the limitations and challenges of individual technologies, as well as a specific mandate of any ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism. And overall, these considerations aim to help stakeholders consider technology as a tool and not a solution. In the report, that each consideration is described in more detail, but they're also illustrated by a set of questions to showcase how these considerations could be thought about in practice. And if we go to the next slide, thank you, I will provide 2 guiding considerations as examples, with the rest being in the report. So first, there is a guiding consideration around the need for contextual knowledge. Here, we, for example, highlight how the successful use of technology in the past in a certain context is not a sufficient indicator for the successful use of the similar technology in the future in what is likely to be a new and different context. Therefore, indicating that contextual assessments of a technology should not be overlooked. And depending on what technology or technologies are being considered, it is also necessary to consider whether conflict parties themselves agree to their use and what may be possible biases in the data collected. So for example, if crowdsourcing technology via phone application is one of the technologies examined, you should ideally assess the level of penetration of smartphones or internet usage and the demography of the population with access to phones or internet, because that will help determine who is feeding in the data. If we go to the next slide, another example regards the security of technology and the data collected. Of course, more technology the more technology is used, the greater the number of attack surfaces and therefore vulnerabilities that you may have. So it's very important to consider this aspect, particularly as security breaches could have a very big negative impact on the trust that you are building with the conflict parties. And therefore, it's really important to assess beforehand how the technology selected for use could be interfered with and put in place the correct security measures. And the next slide, please. So to conclude, we hope that this research will be helpful to those individuals aiming to increase remote ceasefire monitoring and verification to allow them to consider the advantages technology can bring, while also being mindful and give careful consideration regarding how technology can and should be employed. To that end, I just wish to highlight, previous slide. I just wish to highlight several examples of good technologies to consider the future the possible kind of future good practices that could be adopted and which are also included in greater detail in the report. So first, promote the use of and continuously refine and update the guiding considerations, such as by encouraging their use during mediation discussions. Second, improve knowledge sharing. This includes better data sharing between relevant stakeholders, such as the sharing of lessons learned regarding the use of technology in a ceasefire context, but also the sharing of data enabling the use of certain technologies, such as the sharing of high quality image or video data to train artificial intelligence. Third, encourage multi-stakeholder approaches to bridge the gap between the various areas of expertise, such as technology, ceasefire, and local knowledge. This can be achieved by promoting the use of teams with mixed expertise. Fourth, ensure a minimum level of technological knowledge, such as through targeted training courses. This would mean that there is a common level of digital literacy among the mediators and monitors and greater familiarity with the technologies more generally, and in terms of what they can offer to ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanisms. And such training could be expanded to include other relevant parties where possible. And finally, monitor the evolution of conflicts and related ceasefire agreements to identify new areas where monitoring and verification may be required, such as in the cyberspace, in order to understand and prepare for the future of ceasefire monitoring and verification. And with that, we can move to the next slide. And I thank you all for your attention, and I hope the information and the findings contained within the report will be of practical use to everyone on this call and your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I hope that's given you, those of you who haven't seen it already, a flavor of the report, and I hope a strong appetite to go through it in more detail. As noted in the chat, there is the link to the report there, and it is now available on UNIDIR's website. So if you haven't seen it already, please click on the link, download it, and it'll be something nice to read this evening or on the bus tomorrow morning into the office or wherever you may be. But we've sort of reached almost the halfway mark, I would say, in our session today, and we're going to transition now to the panel discussion that we have put together with a number of experts on ceasefires and technology. And it is therefore my great pleasure to welcome our panelists. These include Heather Coyne, who is a security sector reform officer, a senior security sector reform officer with the Office of Special Envoy for Secretary General for Yemen. Ajay Sethi, senior political affairs officer and an advisor on ceasefires and security arrangements in the mediation support unit of the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Hugh, senior peace and political affairs advisor at the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, and who is currently joining us from Juba in South Sudan. Hugh, I hope the connection will allow you to join us with camera. If not, it's always good to hear your voice and your views, even if we can't see you. And Valerie Stischer, who is a research fellow and who is joining us from AI in Singapore. Valerie, I hate to think what time it is there, but very grateful for you to have taken the evening out, I presume, or if not the night out, to join us. But before we launch into the discussion, I do want to say that UNIDIR promotes the core values of the United Nations as regards integrity, professionalism, respect for diversity. So we are committed to convening panels that bring together a multitude of views and voices from diverse places and perspectives. And nonetheless, however, the views expressed in this event today are the sole responsibility of the individual panelists. They do not reflect the views or opinions of the United Nations, UNIDIR, its staff members or sponsors. And with that short disclaimer, I'm very happy to move ahead to the panel. We have a number of questions that I will put to the panel, and I would encourage those of you who are joining us today also to use the question and answer function to post any questions that you may have during the discussion, and we will do our best to, as I said, to try and get to them as we go through this. And I know there is one up already, but if you don't mind, we will go maybe into the discussion first, and then see quite how we address that one and who it may be addressed to in terms of our panelists today. My first question would be to Valerie. And Valerie, I was wondering, in what ways do you think that technology is permeating ceasefire monitoring verification now? And based on what you've heard today already, for instance, but also some of your other research, how effectively do you think this is currently being used? And what, if anything, could be improved?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the question. And thank you to Sarah and Alexander for laying out the field so nicely. So many of the things, so what I will talk about has already been discussed in one way or another, but maybe I will just highlight two areas where also my own research focuses on. So in terms of the technologies that Sarah presented, I think in terms of what is already, kind of being used in ceasefire monitoring missions today, very clearly, in terms of data acquisition technologies, we see those in use. It's still only a handful of cases that really, use them, but especially remote sensing technology, so cameras mounted to UAVs or the use of satellite imagery or stationary cameras, acoustic sensors, etc. I think Alexander spoke to some of these. We do see those in use and really already kind of supporting human monitors in their daily work, both in the field, but also at headquarters. So kind of two areas where I think perhaps in terms of effectiveness and what could be improved. So data acquisition is already there, but I think Alexander also spoke to data processing and the kind of sensor to server ratio. And there really we see kind of new bottlenecks in terms of the vast amount of data that is being collected and how do you then actually process that. And that's not only in terms of creating new labor for the monitors, but also constraining how a mission can systematically use, technologies to monitor a conflict, not just, punctually or to verify or to follow up on specific incidents, but also, use it more broadly. So here, I think in practice, we don't see a lot already integrated in the missions, but there's a lot of research going on. I mean, one research project that I'm involved in, for example, looks at how we can use open source satellite imagery combined with deep learning to pre-select relevant images that then human monitors could look at. So they don't need to go through everything, but they can actually look at what the algorithm tells us might be relevant imagery. A completely different area, so moving away a bit from technology and focusing more on the use of technology and what it means in a very political context, is the question of what do we actually use these technologies for. So it's very clear that it broadens a mission's observational power and its ability to monitor and verify both in temporal terms. So Alexander spoke to nighttime monitoring, but also I think Sarah mentioned the ability to cover remote areas, etc. But how does it actually affect ceasefire compliance and the relationships between conflict parties, etc.? And I think there, so one of the research projects I do with a colleague at the University of Gothenburg, Ali Verci, we've been looking at that question a bit more. And what we find is that much more attention needs to be on the follow-up. So what do missions actually do with the information that they gather? And what we also find is that this follow-up should look differently depending on the kind of political context that a mission operates in. So, it really matters if there is political will. I mean, we talked about that already a little bit, but if there's political will by the conflict parties or by the leadership to comply, but maybe some command and control issues, it's a very different situation from others that we face. And then also, for example, are third-party actors able and willing to impose costs for ceasefire violations, etc. So that will really shape, the response and the follow-up on how information is being used, and whether it actually makes a difference in terms of what we see play out on the ground.
Sorry, I think that's a very interesting one. The idea of follow-up. I mean, we can better look at what's happening, better understand what's happening, possibly attribute, but then our ability to ensure compliance is not supported in this case beyond the more increased ability to name and shame parties who may be violating a ceasefire. I don't know if other panelists would like to come in on this question. If not, I'm happy to move on to the next one. I see no hands raised, but I would ask colleagues who are helping monitor this as well. Then I'm pleased to welcome Ajay. Ajay, it's lovely to see you, hear you again, all the way from New York. We are literally going around the world today with our panelists. And Ajay, the point we had for you is really that we're increasingly seeing technology available to civil society and conflict parties. I think Alexander mentioned the decreasing costs and the decreasing barriers to this, although I think the political barrier still remains in many cases. But it is more accessible in ways it wasn't before. The use of drones, the use of mobile phones, which can capture data, in new and different ways, but also the ability to communicate more quickly and get messages and information on incidents, so early warning and these type of things across much earlier. Can they sort of inadvertently aggravate or escalate tensions? And we've seen, I think, in a number of contexts, sort of false information come in, or information come in that has actually led to a reaction before it's been verified and then found to be wrong. And do you see this as a potential issue, both for civil society, the conflict parties who may be reacting to this or may be victim to this, but also the ceasefire monitors who are having to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff and work in an environment where there is a demand for an increasingly swift response, maybe? And if you see that this is a potential issue, any thoughts on how to mitigate it? We've given you some easy ones here.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks a lot, the colleagues. And I think at the outset, I would like to say many congratulations to Sarah, because you know, all the labor of love and hard work has come to fruition, and congratulations. And of course, thanks to UNIDIR for inviting me over and connecting with old friends, and also see a number of participants who are joined in. Thank you to them all. And I will also say that this is a very timely publication, and I will not definitely lose this opportunity to publicize the DPPA's guidance on mediation of ceasefires, which is the globally first ever mediation guidance on or negotiation of ceasefires, which is due to be soft launched in July and formally launched in September. So September event, of course, will be a very big event, and we will invite you all to attend that. And there is a specific section dedicated to the technologies, and I think this UNIDIR publication kind of expands on that, and very, very happy. So very timely. Coming back to your question, Simon, I think I would like to just highlight few things in that question and issues related to that question. First of all, unpacking that question a bit, if I got it right. You used the word civil society, I would say local communities as well. And then the second most important thing I would like to underline for all our viewers and listeners is access to technology. That's not very symmetrical, very, very different in different contexts. And the third important word used is data. Now, the data is a misnomer sometimes. Data at which end? Data can also be kept collected, unused at the user end, and also at the synthesis end, which is the monitoring verification mechanisms of ceasefires, which are there. So these are important things. So let's keep that in mind. And I would also like to say that when it comes to local communities and the technologies, basically, I think each one of us, whether in conflict or not, we are emitters as well as receivers. We are, capable of emitting information. That's what your power is, today. You can pick up a keypad and really bring a government down, or bring a mechanism down, or spoil an agreement, or you can make or mar an agreement. And with the same technology, you're also receiving, because then you're also prone to psychological and perception management. So it's the two-way thing. And that is why I'm just mentioning this, because it is important to note, and this plays up quite a bit in the context of the ceasefires. So when it comes to being an emitter and a receiver, so we play a dual role, and then local communities also play a dual role. So, and the other thing which we all know, and I'm stating the obvious, that there are variety of conflicts and variety of contexts and variety of ceasefire agreements you're talking about. So neither one is similar to the other. and the dissimilarities are huge sometimes and not so huge, but definitely the contexts are big variables there. Now, for example, availability of bandwidth or internet and who controls that internet can really change the whole game. And I will not be using any context for even if Chatham House or anything, but I would not like to use context. But there are contexts we are dealing with right now, wherein a specific area where you are considering use of technologies and parties are agreeing to it is in an area where the internet is controlled in a way by one of the parties to conflict. So then, even if you field such a mechanism and you have the technology being used as a multiplier, force multiplier, but then how many people will willingly use it is a question mark. So I'm just underlining this because this is important to keep in mind that there are a variety of contexts. And there are some places where you don't have access. You may have access to a smartphone, but you don't have access to something like a stable Wi-Fi. And that is also important point. And then there are some contexts where the conflict parties love the Wi-Fi so much that they would kill everything around a cell tower and yet ensure that nothing happens to the cell tower. And so there are contexts here. We are dealing with one of the contexts, very live context conflict in your own, I would say contemporary world today, where you will never hear that there is a shortage of diesel or petrol or fuel for running the generator sets, for running the Wi-Fi or cellular towers, but everything around that will be kind of dead and damaged. So there are different types of contexts, and in that context, I would say that when it comes to local communities, 2 or 3 things again become very important here. One is an active role in which they are actively participating, in a like a live thing. You record something, you beam it, or you send it to a mechanism which is responsible for monitoring and ceasefire, implementation. And then there is a passive system in which you may not have access, but then you can still record. You can record videos that become monumentally useful for transitional justice. And I won't name any conflict, and it, that some of the big governments have requisitioned the usage of softwares wherein all the social media analysis and all the public in that specific area has been told to upload their videos, which they may not have been able to beam and transmit that time because of the passive modality, because they can't, because of no access, but now they can. So this is the data I was referring to. So this is the transitional justice. And so this is about justice and accountability in the longer term. So this becomes hugely important for ceasefire, not only implementation, but mediations and negotiations as they go along. And then I would also like to caution you that the use of technology can be structured or unstructured, in a formal sense. You may have a formal mechanism as part of the ceasefire monitoring verification, and you may have a very unstructured organic thing developing by the local communities themselves. So that's the variety of context which I am just trying to underline for all of us. And then, of course, we have to remember that there is a difference, very, very strong difference, which slowly and very subtle manner starts getting mixed up, is that there is a difference between monitoring a ceasefire and monitoring a conflict. So when you talk about conflict monitoring, it is monitoring everything. It has got nothing to do with a provision or some of the factors that may have been agreed between the parties. While ceasefire monitoring is very specific. So we have to just be cautioning ourselves the way the discussion is, And that's why I'm just trying to give you a chapeau for my own comments, because people will say, but yeah, that we know, but this is not it happens. Let's use cell phone, let's use satellite technology, open sources. I mean, how are they related to specific provisions of a ceasefire agreement is a question that I have and the parties generally have. So having said all this, I would say that yes, answer to your question is, of course, the access to technology is huge. Local communities playing big role, yes. In 95% of the 11 important ceasefire agreements which have been signed in one last decade, or 12 years to be precise, 95% of the cases, the technology, the local communities using that and piggy riding that has really played a major role, and they will continue to play a role. Now, while the technology is an enabler, it is a spoiler as well. So that is again stating the obvious, and I will I would rather focus on some of these provisions or some of these actions that are or could be taken to circumvent that challenge posed by the technology in the hands of local communities. First of all, I think it is important that there have to be very clear, mutually agreed provisions in the ceasefire agreement itself in terms of what is the use of technology, how shall that be used, who is empowered to use it, who's not, and either this is part of the agreement or it is part of the standing operating procedures of something that you are attempting to do as part of the implementation of the ceasefire. So you just can't leave it to imagination. These things have to be discussed. And the second most important is that you have to get consensus of the parties. That's the super most important lesson that I have learned myself. That you can't take everything for granted. You cannot assume anything, because it's not that the parties are not amenable to it. It is about suspicion of the parties, and it's about the parties' efforts to safeguard their own turf and territories in a way that, yes, I would not like to do this because that will expose me. So they would behave in a very naive manner sometimes. No, we don't know this because there is a hidden interest position behind all that. So it is important to have consensus built in the parties on a number of issues, not only about the type of technology, about the sourcing. Where will this technology come from? That's very important, because in some contexts, anything made in dash 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 is incriminating. You say no, you this is a spy work. This is all the information is directly going somewhere else, and we will not use it. So who is the owner of that, and who is the owner of data? So there are a number of things, and we've discussed all these issues in the guidance itself of the DPP, and also I'm sure Sarah's the UNIDIR publication also focuses quite a lot on that. And then the third important thing to circumvent the challenges is managing the expectations of the population. 4 years ago, in a context which is still a very live context, a very routine, low-key software was launched for monitoring a ceasefire in a specific geographical area. And you'll be surprised, the whole pipeline was clogged because the civilians did not understand, the local communities did not understand as to what is this for. So they know there is a ceasefire, but they don't know what can this channel be used for. So right from stealing of their goats to weakening of the roof during the last rains, which was sabotaged, quote unquote, by the neighbor who belongs to a political party which is associated with an armed group. So you were choked with all kind of information, in that pipeline. So managing the expectations of the stakeholders and local communities is very important. What it is and what it is not has to be very clearly told to them. And of course, as all the colleagues mentioned beforehand, reporting is fine, information gathering is fine, but then every information that comes to you comes with an expectations of action. It is not that informations are neutral. So once somebody reports to you, after reporting, they expect action. So they say, okay, I reported to you last month. What the hell did you do? So what is happening on that? So this manage of expectations is very important. Very small point and minor point, but this is a very huge issue sometimes, which can really make or break a process. And don't overburden the mechanism. That's what my message would be, based on, we are practitioners, we look at examples and wherever we burnt our hands. So if you overload the mechanism just because you have technology, we come back to the same thing, that if you have two servers, you have two platforms, you have plenty of things to do behind. Who's going to collect data, who's going to synthesize, and who's going to respond to all that information that is coming? So the mechanism for monitoring and verification of ceasefire should be very light-footed. It should be focused on the objectives, on the provisions, and not be made complicated just because you have access to technology. Therefore, it has to be driven by the demand and not supply. Sometimes what happens is, most of the use of technologies when it comes to local communities is all supply driven. I have an app, okay, give it to them, but then how to manage that is an important thing. Of course, the fact checking is important wherever the reports are coming in. So there have to be counteractive and countervailing softwares to do fact checking for all the information, because there are a number of ways local communities have also become smart. And then my last question is, do not enable an individual, enable a network when it comes to technology. Because I remember there was a context which was just about a month back. We were trying to inculcate this technological sense, as you said, tech savviness in one of the parties. And there were not a single volunteer from the local communities to take this forward. Everybody had an idea, but then nobody wanted to be running with that. So how do you safeguard their safety and security, reputational risk? So that's why sometimes enabling a network of local community is important than enabling a particular individual. I think I've spoken a lot. I'll stop here. Over to you, Simon.
Ajay, thank you. Always a pleasure to hear you and get your thoughts on things. Again, I'd like to see if other panelists would like to come in on this. If not, I would have a couple of comments. Sarah, do let me know if you see any hands going up. I'm not seeing any. Maybe, Ajay, a couple of comments in response, but also in support of what you've said. The first point on, needing to be very clear about what it is you're monitoring, and you're not monitoring a conflict, you're monitoring a ceasefire. I think this was at the heart of the research that was done on this, and it started by looking at what were the activities, the typical activities that were monitored as a part of a ceasefire process. And therefore, what was the technology that would support looking at those activities in particular? And so I hope that you'll find that it is, focused on ceasefires and not just on sort of conflict more broadly. This idea of access and what is, that it's demand, not supply driven. I would fully agree with that. And I think there are two points here. One is we've seen an approach that's supply driven. Oh, the technology exists to do this, let's use it, when it's not necessarily suitable. So I'm thinking, we've had discussions on early warning systems for the ceasefire mechanism in Darfur, and people said, oh, but they've used cell phones in the DRC and places like that, and as soon as you step out of most of the localities in Darfur, you don't have cell phone coverage. So the technology exists, but is not applicable there. But then there's also, I would say, the political acceptance. And we've had in some cases, I know some very useful sources of information coming through from certain parties that politically would be absolutely unacceptable to use in these contexts. And so just because the technology to gather this information exists in one set of hands or another, we need to be very wary about how suitable it is in these contexts. Thank you. Hey, Heather. You may have recognized one of the contexts I was talking about just there.
To be left unnamed.
Exactly. But for you, I was wondering if you think that there is a risk that technology could possibly be misused and leveraged by malicious actors. So in this case, those who may have an interest in violating a ceasefire or even taking action against observers, and used to identify individuals, their location, their data, and potentially jeopardize their safety. And what do you think can be done to mitigate such risks?
Well, let me start by following Ajay by congratulating Sarah on this timely and useful report, because I've been nagging her for weeks now. Please, can I have an advanced copy? The parties are asking for it. And I hope that we'll be able to get an Arabic version too. But if not, we'll help you with the translation of that, because it really is essential right now, a tool that all the parties are recognizing they need, but they're really not sure how to use and how it could be used against them. So that gets us back to Simon's question. And I think we've got several levels of answers on this from the work in Yemen. And this is, by the way, before we even start putting any data into the systems that could then be manipulated. This is simply the approaching the parties on how technologies might be used. So my first comment picks up on Ajay's remarks, and that is how actors might use technologies to target the parties themselves or to reveal dispositions of their weapons and forces. And the sensitivity on this is really, really high where we work. The parties are reluctant to even share their personal telephone numbers for fear they could be used to target themselves or key leaders who they're meeting with. And we're told that commanders aren't even allowed to bring their mobile phones to the front lines. So there's a very strong awareness of what the risks are. And that sensitivity goes up exponentially when we're talking about transponders and tracking systems for weapons. That was one of the options we were exploring for managing weapons in a transitional arms control scenario. So in most cases, it just isn't an option for us. Anything with a circuit is considered a potential threat to safeguarding the whereabouts of critical weapon systems. For example, we were talking with some groups about making weapons safe but accountable using the equivalent of a credit card system, where the credit card doesn't actually transmit any information. You have to bring the card reader like the waiter does to your table. And one of the parties basically said, we think someone can read your credit card while it's still in your pocket from space. And who am I to tell them that it can't be read that way? So we really had to shelve a lot of the fascinating ideas that technology offered us, because the parties don't understand how, or maybe understand better than I do, how it could be misused or used against them. So that paranoia, and remember, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. It's not misplaced, and it means it's very difficult to get their interest in technologies that could actually help, because they see every technology as a potential threat. So what we're seeing during our current truce that the parties have just agreed to is a very high level of anxiety by some groups on setting up even the virtual operations room that we're using to communicate on the truce. Some of the parties wanted 24/7 cameras in the room to know who was there, that their calls would be answered when they made them. And the other side was very leery of this, preferring to schedule calls at regular intervals. I offered to lend them my cat cam, which has a nice motion detector when the cat comes on screen, but we're still looking for options that allow that continuous communication without a risk. The second area we're concerned about is really just simple misuse of the technological tools as a way of reducing the effectiveness of our monitoring mechanisms. So talking about spamming the comms channels or the digital platform with allegations of violations, or spreading disinformation through social media, which is also part of our monitoring remit. Some of that can be addressed by the appropriate training on how to use the tools or protocols for them, agreements, codes of conduct on how to proceed. And one of our Track 2 partners actually has been developing guidelines for public information, for public statements from the monitoring mechanism that the parties could agree to, so that we already have an idea of what is acceptable, what isn't, and can note it when people go off the reservation or out of bounds. And the third area that the level of concern, and as Simon, you mentioned this specifically in your question, is using the technology against observers, especially our civil society and community monitors, who are looking, I'll be clear about this, just at the civilian impact aspects of it. We're not using civilian monitors to monitor the military aspects of the truce. They're looking at how the truce can be used or is affecting the civilians and civilian livelihoods. So one thing we're doing is training the civilian observers on how to protect themselves in their work on supporting an agreement. And that includes what to keep on the phones, how to sanitize them, that kind of thing, as well as other aspects of battlefield or operational safety. But ultimately, they are vulnerable to harassment by the parties through technology or any other ways of observing their involvement. For instance, one local mediator told us that at a checkpoint, a soldier just added contacts to his phone in front of him and then claimed he had suspicious contacts in his phone list. So you just don't have subtlety or accountability in how this is working. That's where we feel there's a role for top cover, sort of a contact group or a group of friends, the way that you've used those for official mechanisms, but applied specifically and designed specifically to support the unofficial civil society component of the implementation mechanisms. Basically, somebody who can intervene when there's interference with the civilian monitors. And that's less of a technological fix and more of a political one, which gets back to several things Ajay just said and Valerie as well, about this being about the political will as opposed to simply the technological fixes. Over for me. Hope that answers the question.
So Heather, I think that does. It strikes me that there is, in certain ceasefire contexts, a heavy use of technology, and I'd say both ways. There is a potential, in some contexts, technology is more present because we're trying to leverage it to monitor a ceasefire, but it is also more present in people's minds as a potential spoiler of things, and way that it could, to be used against them. And this, I think, is rather unique to some contexts and others. We're looking at much more simple things, and the parties that are potentially interested in acting as spoilers have less access to this technology as well, but we also tend to have less access to it as a monitoring tool also. But the levels of paranoia around this go up depending on who's present in those contexts or who's watching those contexts, even from outside the monitoring. Thank you. Now, I was just monitoring the chat as well, and I noticed that there was a question on the political will as a precondition for monitoring and verification technology deployment and use. And I hope, Margot, that some of that will have been answered by Heather's intervention here as well, but I'm happy to come back to that as well. But now I'd like to move on to my colleague in the south, Georg. Welcome from Juba, Georg. I don't know if the bandwidth will allow us to see you on screen. It would be a pleasure if we can. Excuse me. And Georg, I was wondering if, looking to the future, to what extent might a changing conflicts, the types of conflicts that we're looking at, the weapon types, etc., change how ceasefire monitoring verification is conducted? And sort of as a corollary of that, therefore, how does it change the type of technology that is used? And maybe also in some cases, we've had I don't know, and AJ may be able to correct me on this, whether we've had situations, ceasefires, where we have mentioned, for example, cyber attacks and things like that, whether the change in conflict may also result in a need for a cyber ceasefire as well. Georg, I'm sure you will have some thoughts on this as well, so thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon. And first of all, let me congratulate UNIDIR for the report, the study that was published, or that is being published right now, which is absolutely great. It's certainly timely, and hopefully it does give rise to lively discussions beyond also this panel and beyond this launch. So thank you very much for that. Simon, I will probably, well, let me qualify first. One, I'm sitting here in Juba, South Sudan, but I will not be talking about the ceasefire that is right now being implemented in South Sudan and for already quite some years, so just to clarify that. And secondly, also, I'm going to look at your question from a lens or through a lens of negotiation support, mainly. So if we're looking at a phase at the negotiation or even the preparation phase towards negotiations, that's what I will try and sort of focus on. And also I will have to apologize that I tried to get my crystal ball going, and this morning it didn't seem to want to work. So I may not be able really to look into the future in terms of technology and how technology will impact, or technology of warfare will impact on future monitoring. What I do think is necessary to say is that we are somewhat in a pickle when we are looking at how we use the term ceasefires. And as Sarah said very clearly so at the beginning, there is no definition of a ceasefire as such. So it might well be that the term ceasefire is being applied to instruments that actually pursue different objectives from maybe what I would call a ceasefire proper or a ceasefire per se. Maybe we are looking at an objective that is to reduce violence first, not to yet halt violence, even if that halt in violence is just a short moment. We're not maybe looking yet at stopping violence in the sense of giving the room, giving the space for negotiating topics, for negotiating issues, for negotiating, tackling the cleavages that are tearing a society apart. And we are not yet maybe talking about ending violence, which would be ending the status of war. And that discussion around objectives, when we are looking at the instruments that are being negotiated towards managing, regulating violence in a given conflict, when we're looking at that, it has implications on how we look at monitoring and or verification. Because it may well be that in some cases, simply the situation is not there yet to actually establish a footprint of a monitoring mechanism on the ground. Because simply the parties do not yet agree to come together, do not yet trust each other sufficiently so as to say, yes, we establish a monitoring mechanism, and even we think about establishing a verification mechanism. Because let us be very clear, the monitoring is there just to report on what is happening on the ground, and it's not there to qualify an incident that may be reported on as a violation. So I think it is very important to have at least a certain clarity on that. In addition to what I just said, I think it's also important to look at different types of monitoring before we even look into the potential use of technology. One is that monitoring may be community-based, it may be civilian, or it may be a rather robust way of going about monitoring, which in some cases can even be armed. Now, the one monitoring element that to me is important, and this is probably most encapsulated in what we call 3 in a Jeep, that is that the parties, through the monitoring mechanism, start working together. And this is where probably I see a limitation to the use of technology today, as much as I see a limitation to the use of certain technologies also in future. That trust-building element, that confidence-building element that is inbuilt in a monitoring mechanism should not get lost. That means the parties to a ceasefire, if they actually agree to going towards a ceasefire that would allow them to negotiate on other topics because they cannot negotiate while they fight. If they agree to actually come together, and that is a lot to do with political will, if they agree to come together and to do the monitoring jointly, it basically establishes communication channels that otherwise would not be there. And it goes, if you want, from the monitor on the ground to the Joint Monitoring Commission and maybe to a Joint Verification Commission throughout the system. And it may go back asking questions and the communication with those civilians on the ground who should benefit first and foremost from a ceasefire. That communication would be or should be done as well through this type of mechanism. So looking into the future, yes, I do see, and I would certainly agree with all the speakers who have spoken before, that technology has its place and will have its place in future. But we should not see technology as replacing ceasefire monitoring in terms of a trust building, a confidence building mechanism. Let me make maybe one last point, and this is something that Alexander and also Ajay have been touching upon, and this to me is extremely important. A ceasefire needs to be technically as clear as only possible. There is no room for ambiguity. What does a ceasefire usually look into? And we're not talking about ceasefires that may be just on reducing the violence, or maybe just a very short-term type of humanitarian ceasefire. But what we're looking at is a more, call it, robust ceasefire. It will be looking at the acts that are prohibited, the acts that are permitted for the parties under the ceasefire. It is negotiated by the parties. It will look at the control of movement. It will look at the control of armament. And all this, together with an open-ended code of conduct, will form what we call the mandate of the monitoring mechanism, which may be supplemented by a verification mechanism. And I do think that this is something that also going towards the future, whatever the means used on the battlefield, this is something we should not forget. And I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You mentioned technology as a confidence building mechanism. I think we're hearing here that it can work both ways. It can lead to a lot of distrust as well as confidence. I think we need to be very, very careful how we use that. I noticed, and I'm being told, that we are actually, I think, just about 2 minutes from the end of the time we had allocated to the full session. So I'm afraid we had some more questions for our panelists, but I'm going to skip them. And I would also ask that if UNIDIR will take the questions that are in the chat, and we'll get back to those of you who have asked questions sort of independently on this. Joanna, just maybe a point for you. I'm glad you found it interesting. If you missed something that that one of us said, we're recording this and it will be posted, I believe, on the UNIDIR website. So for those of you who might have missed something of this discussion, it will be on there. But I'm afraid that in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of shut down the session. I'd like to thank our panelists for your interventions and for what I think was a very thought-provoking set of comments here. And clearly, we've launched this report. It's a first step in this direction. But there is a lot more thought to be put into not just the types of technologies, but how those technologies are used and how they can support, or maybe not, a ceasefire. And I think there's a lot of hope and expectations put in the use of technology. We're not always very clear on the limitations for them as well. But thank you all for your time this afternoon. I am going to hand over to my colleague, Heidi Giesendanner, who is going to give the closing remarks. And so, Hardy, over to you. But before I go, maybe a little thank you to those who you haven't seen on screen, which is Larissa Pacheco and Matilde Vecchioni, amongst others, who've been working diligently behind this to make sure that the tech works and that we've managed to all join this afternoon. So thank you. Hardy, over to you.
Thank you so much, dear Simon, for handing over to me, and thank you to all panelists and the speakers, and for those joining. Simon has mentioned, my name is Hardy Gietzendanner. I'm a senior researcher at UNIDIR's Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program, CAP, and since this has been a joint collaboration and cooperation across the two programs together with security and technology, I have been invited to not only join the event, and I have been following it with greatest interest, but to also say a few words here at the end. I believe Simon has referred to, the event has been recorded and is going to be made available. So I'll keep myself here to I'll limit myself here, but I did want to, of course, thank everyone who joined us today for the attention. And I also did want to once again express our very sincere appreciation and thank yous to Mr. Alexander Hugh, who provided the opening remarks, and then to the panelists and the experts and the practitioners, Heather Coyne, Georg Stein, Valerie Sticher, and AJ Sethi, who joined us for the event today. So really our very sincere thanks for this very engaging discussion and the dialogue that we have had. So thank you for that. I think some of the key points, but really there has been a lot that has been said and mentioned. I do think that what this event has demonstrated is this tech positive approach, meaning that technology, as Giacomo has said at the very beginning, is often explored in terms of how it exacerbates conflict or affects international security. But today it was very enriching and refreshing to hear how it can also be explored and used to aid with ceasefire monitoring and verification by helping to increase the safety of the monitors, but also in the collection of information and holding the conflict parties accountable. I did, however, also note and I think repeat that technology should be used with caution, particularly in such sensitive contexts as in those and in the process of a ceasefire. The application, as we have learned in these circumstances, demonstrate that it's necessary to obtain the approval of the conflict parties, but also to consider a large number of issues that we have heard today in terms of the security of the technology, the data collection and the processing, and also how the technologies and the different applications can work together efficiently and effectively as a coherent whole. So with this, I would like to again reiterate, as Simon already did, also express the thanks to those behind the scenes, Matilde, Venting, and Larissa, whom have supported us in making this a smooth event today. I was also very pleased to hear from the panelists and some of the speakers about the usefulness and how they see this piece of work and the report being used moving forward. So from UNIDIR's side and the two programs, I think we are looking forward to more joint work across our programs, but also in cooperation with the stakeholders and partners. And to continue to overcome some of the silos that we sometimes experience, and in bringing the different communities together to produce research, relevant research, and to address issues that sometimes don't receive the attention or fall between these different silos. With this, I would like to come to a close. I would also like to mention before closing that for the event, of course, we committed to the continuous learning and improving the way in which we conduct these events and our work. So I think you will see a link to a feedback survey that we would like to kindly ask that those who joined us filled in, and we will analyze that for the mentioned purposes. With this, once again, delighted, and also congratulations to the colleague Sarah and the research team of the report. Once again, it's now out and available. And of course, please use it, refer to it, and promote us in rolling this piece of work out. Very sincere thanks once again to the panelists, the speakers, for those who joined us from different parts of the world, for the participation, your engagement, and the contributions this afternoon. With this, we are wishing you a wonderful continuation of the day and a good remainder of this week. Thank you very much.